Hi everybody, another video on Martin Heidegger's contributions to philosophy of the event. In the first video, I gave you a little bit of an overview of how the book is structured into these numbered sections, 7 and then the 8th, which is a recapitulation of what came before. And we discussed a little bit this part of the book, not the translator's introduction, but rather the footnote to section 1, as well as something that you don't see in this Google Books version. Well, I wanted to walk you through today another section, but first let's do a little brief overview here of what you're going to find. So what you don't know is that I recorded a few videos that messed up, and I kind of am not as inspired as I was in those to sort of try to do them the same way. So I'm just going to do something else and go through the table of contents with you and show you some other things. So section 1, prospect, refers to the prospect of another kind of philosophizing, another way of thinking, a new beginning, or another inception of philosophy. So that means that if it's another, or if it's new, or if it's something else, it has to be in contrast to what came before. What is it juxtaposed to? So I think an easy way to see this is we're going to have here like this, roughly two, I don't really see myself on screen, so I can't see whether you can read that. Let's try it like this. Okay, there you go. 2 columns. It's too bright, hey? 2 columns, A and B. So the B, we're going to put, this is Heidegger's other beginning, or inceptual thinking, and all of the other ways that we'll be able to characterize it. And under column A, we're going to say philosophy as it has been done before Heidegger. So there's B, the other beginning. Here's A, we're going to call it metaphysics because that's what Heidegger calls it. Now, metaphysics, to show you a picture that I drew in one of the recordings where I forgot to turn on my microphone. Well, I didn't forget to turn it on. It's not really about turning it on, but I had the wrong microphone selected. So let's go back to the notes here. Bear with me for a minute. Yeah. All right, you see, here's column A. Well, actually we have here row A, row B. Okay, so metaphysics, another beginning. Before Heidegger, Heidegger's project. And if we take a look here, I'm going to explain to you what this means. So metaphysics for Heidegger is the whole way of thinking that exists between beings, that's what these circles represent, these are beings, and being as that which is most common to beings. So he calls this the ontological difference between beings, B-E-I-N-G-S, and being, B-E-I-N-G. Now, if you think the spelling's unimportant, let me just show you here in the table of contents, and you're going to see it in the section that we discuss. Before too long, you have here B-E-Y-N-G. You see that? Section 33, the question of B-E-Y-N-G. So B-E-Y-N-G goes into the B column. Okay, that's part of the language of another beginning of philosophy. Whereas beings and being with an I, dun, 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 up there, that belongs to row or column A, which again he calls metaphysics. So Heidegger's basic formulation here, or I'm going to give it to you as a basic formulation, is that first, we have something called the ontological difference, the difference between beings and being. We also have the interpretation of being, with an I, as that which is most common to beings. Now, what does that mean? It means we're thinking being on the basis of beings, on the back of beings, as that which is most common to them, as that which makes them what they are, as that which is responsible for their being. You see? So that closely knit relationship between being and beings falls within Heidegger's presentation of the first history of philosophy, from before Plato to Nietzsche. And he is going to be trying to give us the prospect of a new kind of thinking. And another thing here, you see this term event. So again, I'm telling you, this is a spontaneous presentation. It's slightly different than the one I had originally planned, but I promise you it's going to be helpful. About event, I'm going to tell you what I think is a helpful way of accessing what, as a first approximation, Heidegger is conveying with that word, Ereignis in German. So beings are, okay? The books, the microphone, the camera, the pencil, the paper, my glasses, whatever's around you, have a look. All the things, all the beings, we say they are. Beings are. Being is. So if we have beings and being in our column A, we also have the words being is and beings are. Now we ask the question, what should we put next to B-E-Y-N-G? We don't want to say being is, because somehow we want to differentiate it or distinguish it from being as interpreted metaphysically. So there are various ways we can say this, but one is that being let me see if I can make that legible for you. There we go. Being eventuates or essentially occurs. So we have the word Ereignis, that's event. And he also uses this word vest, which is related to Wesen, but which is a word for, it's like from this series of words in German. Okay, but what we get ultimately is a different vocabulary, a different language, a different set of basic words that bring to light the difference between B-E-Y-N-G and being as thought metaphysically. So if you're wondering why sometimes I have a hard time pointing to the right thing on the paper, because I'm seeing like mirror images on my screen, so I'm going to do my best here. So being essentially occurs, that's a translation you'll sometimes see, or we can also say eventuates. Okay, or being essentially occurs as the event or in the event. Okay, so we begin to think event in relationship to B-E-Y-N-G, in relationship to column B, in relationship to inceptual thinking, another beginning, and all of that. And with that in mind, let me just skip ahead here to the section that I originally wanted to discuss with you, the very first block of text that precedes the first numbered paragraph. So let me just show you that again. This is where we left off in the previous video, the footnote to section 1 called Prospect, the relationship to the black notebooks. And then we have here a page in which he says something about the title, and finally the first numbered paragraph of the first section. But if we focus in here on the basis of what I just told you, we see that this distinction between the official title, Contributions to Philosophy, and the essential rubric of the event is really just another way of saying it's the mapping between A, that's the essential title, A, that's the official title, B, that's the essential rubric. A, that's the old way, B, that's the new way. Okay, there's some things here that we haven't gotten to yet that I'm going to show you in a minute. So let's see what he writes, and this should begin to fall into place for us. The official title, Contributions to Philosophy, must by necessity now sound dull, ordinary, and empty, and will make it seem that at issue here are scholarly contributions to the advancement of philosophy. The way that I like to think about this is that it's imagined like an encyclopedia of contributions to philosophy, where the idea of a contribution is just something that you've added or a dent that you've made to the discipline, either by introducing a new argument in logic or ethics or whatever the case might be. So he says that's what it must sound like. Contributions to Philosophy has this scholarly, dry, academic, dull, ordinary, empty sound for us. And philosophy can be announced officially in no other way, since all essential titles have become impossible on account of the exhaustion of every basic word and the destruction of the genuine relation to words. If you're reading that for the first time, that is already enigmatic. And somehow it tells us that Heidegger is contrasting for us something ordinary and by now customary and comprehensible with something new and perhaps not ordinary and not immediately comprehensible. So what he says is that essential titles have become impossible on account of the exhaustion of every basic word and the destruction of the genuine relation to words. So we could surmise, we could guess or speculate that Heidegger's project has something to do with, first of all, talking to us about the process of the exhaustion of every basic word. How did that happen? That every basic word became exhausted and essential titles became impossible. And secondly, is there anything that we can do towards restoring, repairing a genuine relation to words? Let's continue. The official title, however, Contributions to Philosophy, is also in accord with the matter at issue to the extent that in the age of transition from metaphysics, column A, to the thinking of being in its historicality, column B, no more can be ventured than an attempt at a thinking which would arise out of a more originary basic position within the question of the truth of being with a Y. So there's a lot here that it's necessary to explain to be able to make any sense of what he's talking about. Because if you just picked up this book for the first time and you see that he's writing being with a Y and originary basic position within the question of the truth of being, all of that has a very specific sense for him that is not obvious this early on in reading the text. And that's okay. That's why I'm here to try to help. So let's have a look. We have the age of transition from metaphysics to the thinking of being. And you could just say that therefore we're dealing with an arrow, a transition from metaphysics to the thinking of being. Don't worry about Dasein. We're going to get to that in a minute. So in the transition from being with an I to being with a Y, for example. And this is going to be an attempt at a thinking. It's not going to be systematic, system building, like in Hegel and like in some of the other German idealists. It's a feeling out. It's taking some first steps. Yet even the successful attempt must, in conformity with the basic event of that which is to be thought inventively, keep its distance from every false claim to be a work in the previous style. Now, believe it or not, there's a lot to say about this sentence. Even the successful attempt at this thinking out of a more originary basic position must, in conformity with the basic event of that which is to be thought inventively, keep its distance from every false claim to be a work in the previous style. I'm going to say something about that momentarily. Future thinking is a course of thought and not a configured systematic work. So the first thing I would like you to notice about this passage is the following. We can say as well in our column that here we have under the old way, under metaphysics, we have the work, and under the new way of inceptual thinking, we have a course of thought. Here maybe we have system, here we have intimation. Here we have a well-configured total rational account of the whole, and here we have something else here, our grasping for or exposing ourselves to a more originary basic position within the question of the truth of being. You don't have to understand what that means yet. You just have to begin to open up the space of column B. So something that came to mind in my previous recording, which failed, that I want to mention here is this. Heidegger is going to be giving us a new set of terms, some new words, even in the case of B-E-Y-N-G, archaic spellings in German S-E-Y-N, of words that are quote unquote familiar to us. He's going to keep trying to move us in the direction of column B, or we can even say he's going to begin to try to distinguish the columns for us. He's going to begin to try to create the space of column B for us in the first place, for our thinking, for our being directed towards, okay? He's giving us some access to something that we're really unfamiliar with. And the temptation all of the time is going to be to take what he says here and to interpret it in terms of what we know from here. Oh, what Heidegger is saying is exactly like what this other thinker said. Oh, this particular term in Heidegger must mean this particular term from some other thinker. When he says Dasein, he must really mean, self-aware self-consciousness. When he says being with a Y, he must really mean this. Okay, so you must guard against the temptation, or at least be aware of the pull exerted on our thinking by column A when we are beginning to develop our first intimations, our first access to another beginning of philosophy or to the prospect of inceptive or inceptual thinking. All right, so that's going to be, it's now on the record that that's going to be a constant temptation or process, and you just got to catch yourself doing it. Boom, going back to column A. So we look here and we see something else that's a perfect example in this sentence of that very temptation. You see the word here, inventively. Let's focus in on it. So even the successful attempt at this kind of thinking must, in conformity with the basic event of that which is to be thought inventively, keep its distance from every false claim to be work. Let's look at what this is. The basic event of that which is to be thought inventively. Well, about event, I said something in passing. Not even in passing, but we said that event is a word that belongs to column B, and we associate it with B-E-Y-N-G. And so we know that it has something to do with inceptual thinking. What about this being thought inventively? So when you hear inventive, invention, inventor, or inventively, you might interpret that as he made it up, or he thought it up, or he devised it. It's something of his own making. It's his invention. He brought it to be, and maybe he brought it to be from nothing. Okay, invention can have the sense, and maybe for you does naturally have the sense, of thinking something up. Now, as it happens, Heidegger says something extremely important to us about what he means by inventive thinking or by thinking inventively later in the book. And when I read that to you, you're going to see that it means the exact opposite. So I'm reading to you now from page 69, numbered paragraph 43, about the middle of page 69. Inventive thinking, Heidegger writes, does not mean thinking up or arbitrarily devising. In other words, it doesn't mean what you might naturally think it means if you hear it in terms of column A. Instead, it refers to that thinking which, in questioning, stands up to being with a Y and challenges being with a Y to attune the questioning through and through. Now, I'm going to tell you what that means. I'm going to give you access to what Heidegger is trying to convey to us here. Let me just read it again, and then I'll show you some pictures. Inventive thinking does not mean thinking up or arbitrarily devising. Instead, it refers to that thinking which, in questioning, stands up to being and challenges being to attune the questioning through and through. That's what inventive thinking is. So we look for a minute at what he wrote, and then I'm going to show you my pictures. So the event is to be thought inventively. If we use the clue of what Heidegger just told us, then we see the following. Let's see. Okay. Here we are, okay, or here's the thinker. And let's say here is being. This arrow on top represents inventive thinking under column A, and the other one represents inventive thinking under column B. In the first case, the question mark, or the thing that we're thinking inventively, is the product of our thinking. You see, it stems from us. Here we are, here's the arrow of making or invention or productivity, and here's the result. So to think inventively is to think in a way that is, let's say, productive, or that is stemming from us and culminating in whatever is invented. Well, what Heidegger says in the passage I just read you is that in inventive thinking, we are letting ourselves, in questioning, have our thinking be attuned by being with a Y. So it's not that inventive thinking thinks something up. It's that inventive thinking is attuned by that into which it is questioning. It stands there and allows itself in questioning to be attuned by that which is most question worthy for Heidegger, being with a Y. So a little thing, like you see this word inventively and it means the opposite of what you might think it means, but you only learn that 67 pages into the text. So hopefully this is beginning to give you a sense of how to work through this. So inventively, we put it under column B, and it means being attuned in our questioning by the thing that we're questioning into, so to speak. Now, about questioning, there's an absolutely crucial passage that I have to read you. It comes early on in the text, and in my opinion, as I'll probably repeat as I'm reading it, it's one of the most beautiful things ever written about philosophical activity, in my view. Really remarkable passages. So let's see here. Yeah, I'm going to pull it up for you on screen. And by the way, there's a lot of this in the section called the prospect. Just, how can we describe it? Jaw-droppingly beautiful insights into philosophical activity. That's why I can't recommend this book highly enough for those of you who feel called to this kind of thing. So here we go. We're in numbered section 4 called Of the Event. Well, where have you seen that before? Of the Event? You already know. Let me just remind you. What do we have? Contributions to philosophy of the event. So now he's going to tell us something about what he means here. This is the column B side of the equation. Here, everything is placed in relation to the unique question of the truth of being, i.e., in relation to questioning. Everything is placed in relation to questioning. In order for this attempt to become an actual impetus, which we want it to be for ourselves if we're studying this book, the wonder of questioning must be experienced in carrying it out and must be made effective as an awakening and strengthening of the power to question. So let me just stop there and comment for a minute. You're not going to be reading this in Heidegger's view if you want this attempt to become an actual impetus in some sort of scholarly indifference or at a distance to the text or in order to dissect it. Somehow our approach to the text has to be, or can be, if we want to have the outcomes that Heidegger is intending for us, attuned by the wonder of questioning. We ourselves have to experience in carrying this out. So somehow we have to submit ourselves to the wonder of the questioning if we want to have this attempt to become an actual impetus. Okay, but to go on, and I promise you we're going to get to the passages that are really, really striking. Questioning arouses immediately the suspicion of amounting to an empty, obstinate attachment to the uncertain, undecided, and undecidable. Questioning appears as a backtracking of knowledge into idle meditation. It seems to be narrowing and hampering, if not even negating. So here Heidegger is distinguishing for us one mode in which you can question, one way in which questioning can appear. It can appear as empty, obstinate attachment to the uncertain, undecided, and undecidable. It can appear as a backtracking into idle meditation. Questioning can appear as a narrowing, hampering, and negating. And a way that I like to think about this is that there's a kind of questioning that keeps everything away from us, that pushes everything apart from us, that in questioning we hold out at a distance in a way that we remain protected. We protect ourselves from what it is that we're questioning by keeping it away from ourselves. Now Heidegger is going to give us a contrast. Nevertheless, in questioning reside the tempestuous advance that says yes to what has not been mastered, and the broadening out into ponderable yet unexplored realms. What reigns here is a self-surpassing into something above ourselves. And really, just to my mind, you can't say it better than this. To question is to be liberated for what, while remaining concealed, is compelling. So we got to spend some time on this passage. The first way of questioning was keeping ourselves separate from what we're questioning, keeping ourselves protected, safe, and untouched, and keeping the thing that we're questioning away and at a distance. However, Heidegger is now giving us an alternative way of questioning, which does not leave ourselves untouched because it is a self-surpassing. In questioning, we surpass ourselves. We take a step beyond ourselves. We go further. We go forward, if you want, or deeper, down or up. You have to think about which spatiality makes sense for you here. But there's a self-surpassing, we can use Heidegger's phrase, into something above ourselves. We're not keeping everything away. In questioning, we're moving ourselves into the compelling sovereignty of the inceptual and of that which remains concealed. An amazing, amazing thought. I don't think I conveyed it nearly as effectively as I would like to do here, but this question, let me just pull this up, hold on. That's just a question mark, okay? That's the question. But in questioning further and further, deeper and deeper into the question, we have this yes-saying self-surpassing, not a no-saying self-preserving or a no-saying self-securing, but a yes-saying self-surpassing. We say yes to the question, and it brings us out of ourselves. All right, I have to just read this one more time and then a few more passages and we'll go back to the main page we were working on. To question is to be liberated for what, while remaining concealed, is compelling. So not the uncertain, undecided, and undecidable, but the concealed and nevertheless compelling. Questioning is in its seldom experienced essence so utterly different from the way it appears in its distorted essence, the one that we may be more familiar with. It is so utterly different from that it often extracts the last remnant of heart from those who are already disheartened. I got to say something about that. So people who question in the first mode, who question skeptically, who question in a way that keeps themselves here and everything else there, they may find that they get no answer, but also no movement, no being brought forward or being raised up. And this can be disheartening. Learning to question in the distorted essence of questioning can extract the last remnant of heart from those who are already disheartened. But, Heidegger continues, they then also do not belong in the invisible ring, enclosing those whose questioning is answered by the intimation of being. In other words, those people who can move here between column A and column B, who can undergo something of what's implied by this arrow, who can let their questioning be attuned by the compelling sovereignty of the inceptual. They are few, and they're not those who are already disheartened. They're somehow those who have begun to heed the call, who've begun to have some sentiment or have begun to hear the intimation of the possibility of another beginning. They are, in other words, if we refer back to the table of contents, we can say that the inceptual thinking is, quote, for the few, for the rare, as you see here in numbered section 5. So we already know something about what he means by contributions. We know something about it's a questioning along the way rather than a work. We have something here of the event, questioning into the compelling sovereignty, a yes-saying self-surpassing, and that it is for the few or for the rare. So now if we take all of that and we come back to the one page that we're trying to understand together, this one, we return here, and hopefully this begins to make a little bit more sense. the basic event of that which is to be thought inventively. That means the thinking that responds to the compelling sovereignty of the inceptual by surpassing itself in a yes-saying. And this kind of thinking is a course of thought on which the hitherto altogether concealed realm of the essential occurrence of being is traversed, and so first cleared and attained in its most proper character as an event. Let me just say something about that briefly. So the altogether concealed realm of the essential occurrence of being is traversed. Again, perhaps helpful first approximation is this. So let's go back to our two columns. We have metaphysics. That's the whole first history of philosophy, according to Heidegger, from the inception of thinking in the Western tradition all the way to its end in Nietzsche. And we have here the thinking of being. Well, in some way, Heidegger is going to present us with the following kind of model. I'm simplifying, but I'm trying to make this accessible to you as a starting point. What this arrow represents is that metaphysics is a function of something that happened with being itself. In other words, metaphysics, column A, is a function of the history of being with a Y. All right? Metaphysics is a function of the history of being with a Y. But we don't know that. That has been hitherto altogether concealed. That being should have essentially occurred. Remember, that's the verb that corresponds to beyng in column B. So that being essentially occurred in a way that for some reason gave rise to metaphysics is something that is hitherto altogether concealed for us. But what Heidegger is going to help us to do is to traverse that course of thought, which shows us the relationship between columns B and A in a way that sees A, or metaphysics, or the first history of philosophy, as a function of the history of being with a Y. Now, I just want to show you something. Let me pause for one moment. Okay, I know that this may seem obscure, and it may, even to some of you who are not in the mood for it, seem really abstract or technical or unrelated or something, but I can't convey strongly enough to you that if we are trying to understand Heidegger, these are the terms in which we have to begin to think. So here's another book of his, The Event. And so we're thinking about, how did he put it here? We're thinking about the character. Yeah, let me read that again. Future thinking is a course of thought on which the hitherto altogether concealed realm of the essential occurrence of being is traversed. Just mentioned that, the relationship between the columns. And so is first cleared and attained in its most proper character as an event. So we're trying to understand, what is it that column B, the main word there, beyng? Well, we have the contributions to philosophy of the event. We have more thinking on the event. We're trying to get into this previously concealed realm of the history of beyng. So initially, when I was giving you this presentation, what did we have? We had just the two columns. We had, here's what was before, and here's what's now. Here's the old, here's the new. Here's metaphysics, here's conceptual thinking. Here's philosophy before Heidegger, here's Heidegger. Here's the work, here's the way. We're going to see in some other examples. And the movement was from A to B. This is over, this is beginning. This has ended, this is starting. Okay, this is the past, this is the future. This is new. That A is a function of the history of being with a Y. Okay, this is actually turning out not so badly. I hope you're getting some value from this. Let's finish by turning our attention to the last paragraph on this first page. The issue, he says, is no longer to be about something. I can show you that pretty quickly. Actually, let's just read on for a minute. The issue is no longer to be about something, to present something objective, but to be appropriated over to the appropriating event. That is equivalent to an essential transformation of the human being from rational animal to Dasein. Now, I just want to say something to you about that. The human being has been interpreted over the history of our philosophical tradition in several ways. But Heidegger says that one of the most important ways, somehow one of the definitions of man that stands at the basis of its later transformations, is the definition of man as a rational animal. The rationality part being our mind or intellect, the animal part being our body and other things. You can see how much you want to put into the category of rational, how much you want to put into the category of animal. But if you interpret the human being as a rational animal, then according to Heidegger, it's almost like, let me give you sort of another picture. Here's the human being. Here is our, okay, this isn't great, but it's enough to make the point, I think. So let's say here's the human being in his full sense, like the truth of our being exposed to being, our deepest roots, our everything like that. So imagine this is what we are. And this is the definition of ourselves as a rational animal. Maybe this is not the best image, but here's what I want to convey to you. What I want to convey with this badly drawn image is that all of the different definitions of man that come in the history of philosophy are built on what's implied by the definition of man as a rational animal. And the definition of man as a rational animal is blocking our access to the truth. Sorry, that's probably not too clear. Is blocking our access to the truth of what it is to be human, the truth of the human being. So there's more to us than is captured by the definition of ourselves as rational animal. And we don't have access to that, quote unquote, more because of the definition of ourselves as a rational animal. It's an obstacle. So we need to both understand why it came to be there in the first place and get it out of the way, not so that we're left with nothing, but so that we're left with access to the truth of who we are. And as you see, this is equivalent to an essential transformation of the human being from rational animal to Dasein. So we have another important word. I'm sure you have heard if you have watched any of my other videos on Heidegger, if you've read any Heidegger, and we can just for now, preliminarily, mark it like that. Man as the rational animal undergoes essential transformation and becomes determined as or defined by or self-interprets himself as or becomes clear to himself as Dasein. So here we have some notions like of animality and of rationality that may be, I think it's useful to say this. Okay, so I actually want to say two things about this and then we'll probably wrap it up. So let's say that here we have R for rationality, A for animality, and B for being. All right. If we don't mind the shorthand. So R for rationality, A for animality, B for being. So if we call ourselves the rational animal, we have two concepts that are rooted in an interpretation of being. The rationality is rooted in an interpretation of being. The animality is rooted in an interpretation of being. And what Heidegger would like us to notice, first of all, so here's going to be being B1 for being column. Oh, let's do column A, column B. So rational animal is rooted in an interpretation of being that belongs to column A. We need to wonder what kind of interpretation of the human being is rooted in BEYNG, or being as disclosed or understood or thought inventively in column B. And there we get Dasein. So in fact, over here on column A, BA, we have two issues, let's say. Sorry, let me point it to you like that. We have two issues. Number one, that rationality and animality are rooted in being as interpreted in column A. So even if this was crystal clear, if we had brought this to light perfectly, we still would have the question, what about the human being interpreted under the terms of column B? But in fact, Heidegger often argues that it's not clear. So not only is it the case that we somehow should consider that essential transformation or moving beyond it, but it's also the case that the rootedness, all I did was erase those lines, okay? That the rootedness of rationality and animality in a metaphysical interpretation of being, we also are not sufficiently clear about that. So Heidegger, you can say, has the goal of clarifying the rootedness of the interpretation of man as rational animal in the metaphysical interpretation of being, so that we can see that, connect the lines, and distinguishing that from man as interpreted in inceptual being, and therefore, in inceptual thinking, and therefore this whole project is, to repeat, quote, equivalent to an essential transformation of the human being from rational animal to Dasein. The fitting rubric is therefore of the event. That is not to be understood in the sense of a report on it. So it's not like you went to the basketball game and then you wrote about what you saw. It's not that here is you guys know I like these pictures because I find that they help to convey something, but that one didn't work out. Let's use this from a previous occasion, drawn for another purpose. So it's not like, here's the thing that's happening. We're going to call that the event. Here's us, and we're observing the event, and then we can write a report about it. And therefore, of the event means here I am talking about the event. Here's my report about the event. Here's what I saw. Here's what I'm describing. It's not that. It's that we are, quote, appropriated over to the appropriating event. You're seized, you're grasped, you're transformed, you're self-surpassed. You are belonging in your thinking and in your saying to being. Now, I'm going to leave you with a phrase from the Bible that I think helps to convey something about what Heidegger is saying here. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. Something like that will give you a first step into what it might mean to be appropriated over to the appropriating event in a way that is not to be understood in the sense of a report on it or about it. Hopefully you found this helpful. As you can see, we've barely moved through the text, and yet the prospect of conceptual thinking may be starting to take some sort of intelligible shape for us, in which case we're making good progress. Thanks very much. See you in the next video.